알아서.
Shinde dozan cevaye dozir go paramane Pajun dundru shamlade ngaje te marindo bandu je gunje parot Mode goa doze ba arya deve shamlade Java nile sorage sene java jishen Jave demba jezeba pamba dome shamlai soso jeve soso ne gojo gogo bonde sonrai namla somboy je kejo yinye shamlai me jombo ben sejege saje namba choyen going in Boba Junje Ba Choje Lombe Shamlon Chole Nombra Java Ye Veje Zamle Gawa Da Nyamdo Tabe Begaraj Cheje Tabe Shamlon De Losan Seje Revon Torbe dojo ni ma shan wo me ze be be zai yende ve je shao lai de le bra zon ve nam ga la lo de da vai shar vai do je ko me zom je ba sha ja ve je shao lai da ne je wa nam je do do de ze be je jurut lab ja yin de gun de be cho do jur wa do bra sho zam le sa je je do yon da che bra ja ve ya ya lon de ba shin do je bo lo de to men Jube son ra jo gun de je do ba ba ga je je ram che ge gun do jo ba nam je la le ma ye je da do cha za se ra gun do je zo je jo je chi zhōng de mōi de bāi, chui ji gō lō gō lōi sō. 그 유럽 전라장자로 반대 도시사를 그저 라마가마 바징으로 근전에 시제베죠 이전에 좀 마트를 근지 sebron 주요 배전전에라 내주지 그 배전 담에도 지경으로 저 바데자라 마른 보제 나게 저를 배면 되 거진지 묘관에 저런데 구성도 영으로자도 올라서 안돼 비디오도 괜찮잖아요 안돼
Thanks.
I think this video have some problem. I can't do anything. I can't do anything. I think this is setting problem. Problem is on my side. My side. My setting. Problem. Video.
Now, can you all hear me? Sometimes the computer does not listen to what I tell it to do. I would like to offer my welcomes to all the Shutter Kempos, the students, and everyone listening over the internet. Today is the 9th day of our Gunja teachings. So I think today I will continue speaking about the spread of the mind only in Tibet. I think it's not worth it to say too much. Now, as I said the other day, an independent mind-only school did not flourish in Tibet. And so in the middle way text that spread to Tibet later, such as Chandrakirti's Ma'udan commentary of entering the middle way, the mind only is made the only main appointment, and refutations are directed against it. Thus, mind only was seen in an even worse way. On top of that, the Shenpeng view spread widely, and it took all the texts that were generally accepted to be mind only and said, these are our texts, they're not your texts. So they kind of forcefully appropriated them. And so that's kind of what happened. So the texts that are generally known as mind only texts, they said they're not mind only. They said that they're Shenton texts. And so this view spread widely. And so then there are also, so that was a situation that happened in Tibet, but there are also some Tibetan scholars who came to the support of the mind only, or you could say that maybe they had some compassion for the mind only. And so there are some of these. For example, there was Jetsuman Urandao, the way he saw it in his dialogues or question and answer, the Lopen Chujel, what he said is that if Asanga Vasubandu and their followers are not mind only, then who is? So in brief, normally if we say that those who aren't generally known as mind only, if you say that they're not mind only, then you need someone you can identify as mind only. Generally, it's not necessarily bad, it makes them worse because of being mind only. It doesn't make them worse. For example, do you assert that you know the mind only? Can you agree to say that you know the mind only school? If he says, Randao says, I do not see anyone in Tibet who comprehends the mind only fully. And so there is that opinion that he expressed. Likewise, Taklun Sulatao also had some thoughts on this, and what he says in his text on the philosophical schools called the All-Knowing. He says in Tibet, what some masters say is that the Mandala positions had been refuted by the glorious Chandrakirti, as they've been so totally refuted that they're. And so that it's saying that the mind-only school is not correct. So it is. He says that. So saying that the mind. So people say that the mind only is a really terrible school. That it's not saying it is good. It seems that my internet is not so good. Please wait a moment. So this is what Taksang Lotsawa said. So in brief, there are some scholars who just felt like they come to the point where they said that basically the view of the mind only was just really too extremely bad, such bad views. They felt that they had to give some support to the mind only, or if they take that they had to speak on the behalf of the mind only. So there were a few such scholars, but to look at it, so that situation is like I'm talking about the bad situation for the mind-only school. But if we look at it from a different perspective, for example, if we take the view such as the one held by the Panchen Shakya Chokden, he had a view or a philosophy that is closer to the mind only than to middle way. And so this did occur in Tibet. Likewise, Maitripa, who is our one of the person who's in our transmission of Mahamudra is Lama Madra. He was a student of Shantipa. Because if you're a student of Shantipa, well, Shantipa was mind only. And so then Maitripa probably was also a mind only. So there are people who do say this. Likewise, within the Kajipa school, we talk about the progression of the 4 yogas, right? And the sequence of the 4 yogas was explained by Shantipa in a mind-only manner. And since the Kajipa assert the progression of the 4 yogas that was explained by Shantipa as a mind-only, so therefore the Kajipa have a mind-only view. Likewise, because the Kagyu also assert that appearances are mind, some Sakya and Gelugpa scholars have said that the Kagyupa school are mind only. So this has happened. Now, I don't need to speak at great length about the Kagyu scholars' method of proving that appearances are mind. But if you look at it in the way they explain that appearances are mind, if we talk about it in terms of they explain appearances as mind, that they say that appearances and mind are the same in substance. And so if we look at this, that instead of the false image, they're actually closer to the true image mind-only school. So that does seem this way. Also in Tibet, there are many who say that the people who hold the mind-only view can only achieve the path of joining. Forget about the path of seeing; they can only achieve the path of joining. And so there are people who present it in this way. However, Drikun Jikten Sumgun wrote in his single intent of true Dharma that the clear realization of mind only is also present at the 7th level, the far progressed. And so this this sentence does appear in his text, the single intent. Now, there are many different ways that is explained. For example, there is it explained in the single intent commentary by Mikyo Dorje It explained as that, and there are different explanations in other commentaries. In any case, in some of the explanations, there are some commentators, early commentators, who explain that the view of the mind-only school is present in the meditative wisdom of the seventh level. So from one perspective, the situation of the mind-only philosophy is very bad. But on the other hand, if we look at it, there are some very similar views to the mind-only view, or some views that are very close to the mind-only. So there are such positions about the view, and some people explain the view in such ways that are close to the mind only. But the main point is that in terms of the view, the mind only was not considered as important as the middle way, and this is pretty certain. But in terms of conduct and meditation, the mind only naturally became very significant. Now, the reason for this is that the Yogacarya mind only school itself was primarily a school of practitioners from the time that it first spread and as it developed, as I talked about this at length the other days. And not only that, the dharmas of Maitreya, the Yogacarya levels, and the works of Sangha and Vasubandu, there is a lot of discussion about the stages of the paths and levels of Mahayana, the conduct of the six transcendences, the meditations on samadhi, shamatha, and insight are taught at length, and these topics are not taught in the middle way texts. So it's like, there's really no choice for Mahayana practitioners but to study these mind-only texts. In particular, among all of our, in Tibet, there are many Indian scholars who came, but the one who had the greatest activity was Lord Atisha. Now, Lord Atisha, the greatest achievement or the greatest impact that he had was not in terms of philosophy. Of course, he had influence in philosophy, but his greatest influence was not in terms of philosophy, but it was instead in the teachings of the gradual path of the three types of individuals, the pith instructions and mind training, and in particular in giving practical advice on how to practice the Mahayana Dharma. He gave many such instructions on how to do this. And so this was his greatest influence in Tibetan Buddhism. Now, when he's teaching the presentation of the three types of individuals, this is a very important presentation. And and his Amata commentary on the Lamp for the Path of Enlightenment, he writes that the source for the presentation of the three types of individuals is the auto commentary on the Treasury of Abhidharma. So he identifies this in the commentary on the Lamp for the Path. Likewise, in the Yogacarya levels, it talks about many different sets of three types of individuals. And so this discrimination of the three types of individuals also appears many times in the Yogacarya levels. Likewise, also in Sangha's commentary on the Sublime Continuum and others, there are many passages in sutras and treatises, the mind only, that talk about that treat the mind only. And these, so that there's also in the Sutra of Mahaparana, there are also mention of this. And so there are many passages related to the three types of individuals in the sutras and treatises of the mind-only school. And so if we speak about it as so I think that we can tell from this that the teachings on the three types of individuals were probably an oral tradition passed down in the lineage of vast conduct or the lineage of the Mahayana. Likewise, the pith instructions on mind training. Now, these were mostly transmitted from Lord Sirlimpa. Now, Sirlimpa or Sudvanadvipa was well known to be a mind-only school. Likewise, the Karapa Sutta that there are the three lineages, the lineage of profound view, the lineage of vast conduct, and the lineage of the blessings and practice. So they said there are these three different lineages. Now, the lineage of conduct can be traced back to Asanga and Vasubandhu and so forth. So in this way, we can say that they're considered to be two traditions of the Su tradition, Bodhisattva. So there's the lineage of vast conduct, the lineage of profound view. So these are considered to be the two traditions of the Bodhisattva vow, the vast conduct and profound view. So it's often said that the former, the lineage of vast conduct, is mind only, and the lineage of profound view is the middle way Bodhisattva view. Now, there are different Tibetan scholars, some who say that it's okay to say this, and some who say it's not okay. There's been a lot of debate. But if you look at the auto commentary on the Lamp for the Path of Enlightenment, then it actually says that these are the mind and the middle way traditions. And it looks like that even if you're doing the lineage of the mind, if you're giving the tradition of the mind only vision, then it comes down to the lineage of the vast conduct. And you do it according to the Bodhisattva vow. And the middle way tradition comes down to the way of the Bodhisattva. And the Sakya Pandita said that when talking about the mind only in the middle way of Bodhisattva vows, he said that the mind only view is lower. So the mind only is a lower view. And because it's a lower view, its rituals and conduct are stricter. Now, the middle way has a higher view, so the rituals and conduct are more relaxed. And so for this reason, he's giving many reasons why the middle way tradition is better. But there are many objections to the Sakya Pandita's positions that are given in both Keruche's three vows and Paozo Tengwang's commentary on the way of the Bodhisattva. And in case we do have the tradition in the Sakya Gilo Kaju Ningpa of taking the vows from both of these traditions, both of the mind only and the middle way tradition. And so for these reasons, even though the mind-only view did not really spread in Tibet, you can say that their conduct and teachings did. Likewise, if we look at many histories, what they say is that, so we talk about how the three Kadampa forefathers, and one of them is Poto Rinchen Sel. What he taught, the six Kadampa texts, which include the Bodhisattva levels and the Ordinatus Sutra. So he initiated the study of the six Kadampa texts. And when he did, then he had quite a great number of students. And so the name of the Kadampa lineage arose primarily because of Potowa's activity, and it became well known because of his activity. And so this is also so within the six Kadampa texts, there are the Bodhisattva levels in the Ornamenta Sutras that are very important texts. So of course, the Bodhisattva levels is like a very important text for the study of the Bodhisattva vow. And for this reason, there have been many Tibetans who have written commentaries about it. And the most important is Je Tsongkhapa's Great Path to Enlightenment. Likewise, the great Tsongkhapa's great treatise on the stages of path to enlightenment and so forth quote heavily from the Shravaka levels. And the reason for this is that they speak about the 9 stages of conduct and the 6 powers and the mental engagement and so forth. And so it's because it speaks about so much of this, it is in these talks, the mind-only texts are the clearest. And so for that reason, in the great treatise on the stages of the path, he quotes heavily from the Shravaka levels. So in any case, these texts, such as the Bodhisattva levels, became well known and generally accepted to be mind-only texts. They were well known and well accepted as mind-only texts, but so generally they're accepted as mind-only texts, but there was a great tradition of studying and teaching them in Tibet. And the main reason for this is not because of their philosophical outlook, but primarily in terms of practice and meditation. So this is why these teachings spread widely, and there was a lot of teaching and study of them. Now, one particular type of literature that is related to mind only are the texts on validity. When you're talking about the texts on validity, prior to the great Ngolden Shedap, only a few texts on validity had been translated into Tibetan. Likewise, in terms of explanation of the text, there are only a few general teachings on them. So Ngolden Shedap considered these teachings to be very important. He went to study the literature on validity with the Kashmiri scholars, including Shenpen Sangpo and Palden Gyalpo. These are the Tibetan names. Now, some people say that Palden Gyalpo was a Buddhist, some say he was a Hindu. It's not certain. And he studied with many other masters and studied the literature of the validity. Likewise, if we think about the sutras of Prajnaparamita, they've got a very profound meaning, and they're very weighty, they're very difficult texts. And so the earlier translations of the Prajnaparamita sutras, you could say there were many passages, had many faults and many problems, many places where they weren't brought direct or properly into Tibetan. There are problems in the language. And so when he studied them, he thought that it was important to have the instructions from the lineage. And so he went through a lot of difficulty and hardships and went to central India. Now, at that time, there are some famous scholars from Eastern Tibet, including Gome Chime. So Gome means he was probably a lay practitioner. Gome Chime, this is the Tibetan name. And also the Mahapandita Bumtat Nipa, and he studied the texts on Prajnaparamita from them. Not only did he study them, you could say that he made new translations, that is to do translating texts that hadn't been translated before, and he also corrected old translations. There are a whole lot of texts that he translated or corrected. Among the texts on validity, there's the commentary on validity, the ascertainment of validity, the drop of reasoning commentaries by Master Dharmottara. In terms of the Prajnaparamita, he taught the 25,000 verse Prajnaparamita, the ornament of clear realization, Asanga's commentary, the 8,000 Prajnaparamita, and the commentary on that by Master Bhadra, and many other texts on Prajnaparamita. And he also taught texts included the Sublime Continuum, the Compendium of Sutras, Compendium of Trainings, the Way of the Bodhisattva, and the commentary on the difficult points of the Prajnaparamita Chatter, and many other Mahayana texts. In case, it said that he did new translations or revised translations of over 8,400 sutra texts. And in terms of the Tantra, he also translated several thousand Tantra texts. He translated quite a large number of texts. Now, as I mentioned before, one of Loden Shedap's main aims for going to India was to study the literature on validity, as is explained in the biography of him by his disciple Zhou Lungpa. So when he returned to Tibet, he primarily taught texts such as the Ornament of the Sutras, differentiating middle from extremes, the root verses of Middle Way, and the texts on the Middle Way by Shantarakshita and Kamalashila. So later in Tibet, we would say in the center between the rearing lines of Middle Way and validity. So we have this saying, right? So what this is that there was like a they're developed a manner of study that unites the view of the middle way with the logic of validity. And what this comes down to is the person who began this can be traced back to Ngo Lo Cao Lo and Shut Up. However, the texts of Chandravirti had not yet spread widely. And so what they studied primarily were the ornament of the middle way, the two truths of the middle way, and the light of the middle way. And so these were the primary texts. So they primarily studied the autonomous middle way. In terms of the validity, later, after the Sakya Pandita, the commentary on validity spread widely. It was only then that spread widely, but prior to that, the text that was primarily studied was the ascertainment of validity. Now, the main reason for studying the ascertainment is that the root verses also include an auto-commentary for the entire of the ascertainment. Likewise, the words are very clear. The words are extremely clear. They're easy to remember. And there are many things that are said in the commentary that are written in verse, but in the ascertainment, the same topics are written about in prose. So the ascertainment is easier to understand than the commentary. So I think that's probably why. In any case, for about 100 years after Ngo Lo and Shut Up, they primarily studied on the ascertainment. Likewise, Logan Shut Up himself wrote a long commentary on the ascertainment. And this is probably the earliest commentary on validity in Tibetan, the one written by Ngo Lo Cao and Shut Up. Now, Ngo Lo and Shut Up had four main students. He had four well-known students. There was the upholder of his body in the monastery, Shanse Pongwa Chuyi, the holder of his teachings, Drolumpa Lodrjungne, the holder of his teachings on Prajnaparamita, the Druchempa Shudabara, and the holder of his teachings on middle way and validity, Kyung Rinchen Drop. So these primary four students. So Shang Pongwa was called the one who upheld his body, the monastery, because he started the Sangpo monastery. So he became the abbot of this, the primary one to oversee the monastery. And then it's after this that the history of Sangpo monastery really spread. And I'm not going to speak too much about that at this point. Now, the second one was Drolumpa, the holder of his teachings, Drolumpa Lodrjungne. So Drolumpa wrote many texts. But the most important of these many texts was the Great Stages of the Path of Teachings by Drolungpa. Now, later, we don't really see it. Then later, some old texts were published in Tibet, and among these was Drolungpa's Great Stages of the Teachings. Now, Tsongkhapa considered this text of Drolungpa to be extremely very important. Like there's the great stages, Tsongkhapa's Great Stages for the Path of Enlightenment, right? So Drolungpa's text was primarily based on the Great Stages for the Path of Enlightenment were primarily passed on Drolungpa's stages of the Path of Teachings. There's also a tradition of Prajnaparamita that descends from Ngo Lo and Shut Up. And so this is a different tradition that comes from Drechempel and Arwa. So most of the Tibetan lineages of so this is most of the teachings on Prajnaparamita can be traced back to Drechempel and Arwa. So Drechempel, sometimes when you talk about Drechempel, it's not saying Dre is also the word for ghost. It's not saying the ghost. And I used to think, I wonder, who is this ghost? Usually when you say ghost and say Dre in Tibet, you think of it something as being bad, but it's not actually. So they're always talking about Dre. So who is this ghost? Later, then I realized that Dre was the name of a clan. So when you talk about Dre and Ard, we're talking about names, and this tradition of Dre and Ard probably came from Kham. So they're great. There's a great master named Sidzin who was in Kham. This is a Tibetan, or this is a Kham tradition of Prajnaparamita. Now, the main student of both Drolungpa and Chung, who their main student was Chapa Chögyal Senke. Now, Chapachugi Senge wrote commentaries of some 40 different texts, and among them, he is extremely learned in validity. So he wrote commentaries on both the commentary of validity and on the ascertainment of validity. In particular, he wrote the 3 collections on validity and logic, the short, medium, and long. So this is what we call collected topics in Tibetan, the Junja, or collected topics in Tibetan. So later we always talk about collected topics and always meditating collected topics. Now, actually, some people say that the Tibetan word Junja is actually a bit of a mistake. It actually should be called collections. It's like collecting the points of validity and called it collected. If you say the word Junja, that means the area where you're the courtyard or the area where you do the debate. It's not the name of the text. Likewise, when we in Tibet, when we do debate in Tibet, we have this tradition of the presenter standing, stamping their foot and clapping their hands, and it's well known that this came from Chapachuki Senge. But a lot of people don't really understand what his view is. Now, his view actually was autonomist. Not only was he an autonomist, he said that the Chandrakirti's tradition had 8 great faults. So he refuted it, saying it had these 8 great faults. And so at that time, there was a Pandita from India called Zana Ane, and he and Chapachuki Senge had a debate. And Zana Anita was a prasangika, or consequentialist, and Chapachuki Senge was autonomist. And they debated, and so he debated Zana. And then he went off to Maitreya, to the five peaked mountain and practiced Manjushri. And when he came back, and he told me, I have to go, I have to get back, I have to defeat Chapachuki Senge. But Chapachuki Senge had passed away. So there's an account of this. I've read some texts that he wrote on the middle way. And he says really hard refutations, very difficult, with a very precise logic to refute the consequentialist view. Now, he had 8 different students, Tsanglampa and Debawa and Tsamapa Tsuta Senje. And so he had other great students called the 8 main students. Now, among his students, there's Pamadrupa Dorji Jaltsam and Lord Dusum Khenpa. So 2 of the 3 men from Kham. So the 3 men from Kham went to study the middle way and validity from Chapachuki Senge. This is something that I think we generally don't know. In any case, when we talk about the topic of validity, so before I was speaking about validity, so if we talk about the tradition of validity, so who founded this? It was Dignaga. And then among his followers, the most important was Dharmakirti. And so these are generally accepted to be mind-only masters. Likewise, in Tibet, the influence of the literature on validity is, if it's not greater than the influence of the mind-only literature, at least it's not lesser. It was very influential. In fact, there are even people in Tibet who would study only the collected topics of logic. And they took great interest. They only studied the collected topics. For many years, they spent many years only studying the collected topics, and then they'd go on debate tours. Do you know what debate tours are? In the old days, they're the large monasteries, right? The famous monasteries, the famous monastic colleges. And so they'd go on a tour of these. Today, they'd go to one monastic college, they'd do debate there. They'd go to another famous one, they'd do debate there. And so this is what we call doing a debate tour. So going to each of the different monasteries. So there are also, in the past, there are even people who want to study the collected topics. Now, actually, we consider this a very basic text, right? But there are a lot of difficult points, and people who spent many years studying this, and then would go and debate tours just to debate this text. We have Karma Chakme, right? What it says in Karma Chakme's life story is that when Karma Chakme went from Kam to the monastic college in Central Tibet, he went to so what is the name? He went to Tudokushin. He went to Kusho Tutenichiling. This is the shutter founded by the sixth Shamar. Now, at that time, this shutter was where they really studied the collected topics. And so it said that Chakma Rinpoche really studied the collected topics very hard. He spent only 1 or 2 years studying other than that. Another comment is, this is no point. You Kaja puts in a point in you studying it. The Sak and the Guluk, they spend like a year studying the collected topics and then begin the before studying the main text. And in the Kaiju text, they spent 3 or 4 years studying this before the beginning to study the text. And there's no point to this. So there's the story of another Lama saying this to Karma Chakme. And so if we look at these accounts, there was a lot of people who had a great interest and great enthusiasm for the collected topics. Now, one of Ngotlodum Sherab's main students was one called Drechempa Sherab Bar. So Drechempa Sherab Bar, his main student was Archanchu Yeshe. Archanchu Yeshe wrote commentaries on the long, medium, and short Prajnaparamita studies, as well as the light of the 25,000 and 98,000 verses. So, and basically it said in Tibet, Prajnaparamita is traced back to Ar. So most of the traditions of Prajnaparamita can be traced back to Ar and to Drechempa. Now, another student of Drechempa Sherab Bar was Chatuwa Zimbabsundru Bar. Chatuwa Zimbabsundru Bar was very learned in the Vinaya, and he'd studied and taught it quite a bit. And so later in Tibet, it was said the Vinaya can be traced back to Cha. So the study of Vinaya and the practice of Vinaya can be traced back to Cha Duwa Zimbabsundru Bar as its source. So in brief, in Tibet, during the later transmission of the teachings, for the transmissions of the teachings of the 5 Dharmas of Maitreya and the 3 great works of the Autonomous Master, the Ascertainment of Validity, and so forth, there's none that does not trace back to Ngotlo Tsawa Loden Sherab. Before Ngotlo Tsawa Loden Sherab, there had been a fair amount of teaching and study of Vinaya and Abhidharma, but there hadn't been any logical presentation of refutations and proof through logical methods according to the works of Dharmakirti. So actually using the methods of validity to really investigate and analyze the text, that tradition had not developed in Tibet prior to that. Okay, so now I think we need to take a 30-minute intermission.